Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show on B-Day. For this was the very day that Prime Minister Boris Johnson had promised would be Brexit Day. Indeed, he said he would rather die in a ditch than not get Brexit done and dusted. But as ever, in the Brexit melodrama, there was a twist in the plot, or at least a big spoke in the Boris wheel. The House of Commons did pass his Brexit bill, but turned down his timetable, leaving it at the mercy of short amendments and long speeches. Boris Johnson immediately invited Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn to a pre-Christmas election party, but the Labour leader was washing his hair and couldn't come. Johnson was then counter-challenged by the Liberals and the SNP to their panto to be held 3 days earlier, only to be told by Number 10 that their Yuletide election was a stunt, not a serious offer. Unlike the Number 10 gambit, which was a serious offer and not a stunt. Principal boy Boris then changed his mind and decided not only to attend the Lib SNP party, but to organise it himself. And then Dame Jeremy Corbyn decided not to be left out and offered to come to the party after all. And that is, viewers, a mere 1 day after snubbing the Prime Minister's Christmas election. The honourable members of the House of Commons decided to have a Christmas election. And that is how elections are arranged nowadays in one of the world's most long-standing democracies. Indeed, former Chancellor turned Tory rebel Philip Hammond at one point called on everyone to grow up and calm down. That never seemed a likely outcome, although everyone might have benefited from taking a look behind them. To make some sense of these latest dramatic political twists and turns, we summoned back members of our celebrated commentators panel. They have a spectacular record of forecasting thus far by predicting against all prevailing wisdom at the time that Boris Johnson's attempt to prorogue Parliament would come unstuck, but that he would actually secure a deal with Europe, and that he would then move for an election if and when Parliament knocked him back. If anyone can make sense of this Christmas Brexit election, then it is today's pundits. In the blue corner, born-again Remainer Peter O'Byrne, and the yellow corner, born-again Brexiteer Lembit Opik.
And now we're going to have most momentous general election of modern British history, probably of the last 100 years.
But first, let us see what you had to say about our show on the imminent departure of Speaker John Bercow.
Well, first up is Pilar Fernandez. Pilar is one of our regular contributors from Spain, and she says, "What a great show. I really enjoyed John Bercow's intervention. He's going to be missed, indeed." And Maureen Hollinsworth agrees with Pilar. She says, "Great programme, well-informed, and the speaker's synopsis very entertaining." Patricia Anderson says, "Bercow has become a legend. Sorry to see him go." And David MacDonald, standing down because he's disgusted, presumably with the rest of the Parliament, according to David. And Ian Murray, presumably not the Labour MP Ian Murray, he talks about Kate Hoey and says he can't see Hoey surviving the election anyway. Well, of course, Kate Hoey is actually one of the many talented members of Parliament who announced that they're standing down, particularly talented women members of Parliament. So John Bercow timed his going immaculately and yesterday presided over his last Prime Minister's questions. So he's retiring from the chair. So let's remember for one last time the intones we shall all be missing.
But, Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will want to join me in recording that after 10 tumultuous years, this is your last Prime Minister's questions. And as befits a distinguished former Wimbledon competitor, you have sat up there in your high chair, and not just as an umpire, ruthlessly adjudicating on the finer points of parliamentary procedure with your trademark Tony Montana scowl, Mr. Speaker. Not just as a commentator, offering your own opinions on the rallies you are watching, sometimes acerbic and sometimes kindly, but above all as a player in your own right.
I hope you will indulge me one moment while I say a word about you. I'm sure you will.
I don't know what they're paying him, Mr. Speaker.
Order!
But I haven't finished.
Order! In response to that question, the Prime Minister has finished, and he can take it from me that he's finished.
Resume your seat, Mr. Harper. You don't stand when I'm standing, and that's the end of it.
I couldn't care less whether you like it or not.
It's nothing disorder. I didn't require advice on order from you, Mr. Stewart. You're a master of disorder, man. After the imposition of the migrant ban by President Trump, I am even more strongly opposed to an address by President Trump in Westminster Hall.
We'll join Alex with our pundits panel shortly, but first to Scotland. Economic commentator Michael Fry is something of a rarity, a free market economist but also a supporter of Scottish independence. Alex asks him where stands Scotland in this Christmas Brexit election and about his recollections of winter elections of the past.
Michael Fry, political commentator, but also a notable historian. So let's have a look at the winter elections of the 20th century. Now, there was another winter election in February 1974 when Edward Heath, Tory Prime Minister, with a majority in the House of Commons, went to the country and things didn't turn out as he expected either.
Absolutely not. Well, he wanted to make it an election of the government versus the trade unions, which is a rather distant analogy from Boris's election about the people versus parliament. But the early 70s had been a time of rising industrial unrest, especially as, again, Britain was losing its economic position in the world, and various staple industries, obviously mining, but also in Scotland, shipbuilding and coal mining, they were all falling victim to foreign competition. So obviously the trade unions wanted to protect their members' jobs and the industries they were working in, but the government had got to the point where it regarded it as an absolute necessity that they should take charge and they should decide which industries were going to survive, because now, of course, they were prepared to offer state money to do this. But they weren't prepared to offer as much state money to the mines as Arthur Scargill and others wanted them to. So there'd been a lot of industrial disputes, and Edward Heath and his cabinet, well, not so much grew tired of this, but got to the point where they thought, with one short, sharp shock, they could kill off the power of the trade unions, and the general election of February 1974 was meant to do that. Unfortunately, what happened then was a hung parliament, so nobody really got what they wanted.
How about this winter election? Do you think Boris Johnson's in for a shock, or do you think he's gambling correctly in manipulating his election?
Well, certainly the lesson of those two previous examples, 1923 and 1974, shows that things don't always go the way that the government expects them to and has calculated that they will. Now, this time, we don't really know. We've had no real tests of what public opinion about this, well, the Brexit deal hasn't been reached yet, but the prospective Brexit deal is. And in many ways, it looks rather a poor deal. I mean, Boris says it's brilliant, but not many other people agree. So I think because of the lack of evidence, I think public opinion will be very volatile. And more than usually, it will depend on the way the campaign goes. I mean, campaigns are full of accidents, unexpected events. And we still have people in Europe who don't wish us particularly well. We have the European Commission and Monsieur Barnier, who seem to be taking a dim view of the whole thing. I think there's an awful lot could go wrong between now and mid-December.
And how about the situation in Scotland, Michael Fry? How will the European position interplay with the Scottish constitutional question?
Well, I think it's very difficult to see anything but a good result for the SNP, who lost out last time, went down from 56 to 35 seats. But this time I would expect them to regain most, if not all, of those seats. And I think there's two reasons for this. I mean, the first one is that I think Nicola Sturgeon has quite subtly, without going over the top, kept the brew bubbling on Scottish independence for these last 3 years. Plenty of marches, plenty of demonstrations, plenty of hints and winks about this and that. So the troops are all raring to go. So you can expect a very enthusiastic campaign. But at the same time, the actual object, the purpose of the election is to decide about Brexit. And that then awakens the original SNP idea that because Scotland voted so heavily in favour of Remain at the European referendum, this gives us a mandate to go again for independence, even if the attention of the UK is riveted on something else. So I think at the end, we'll get two positive results from the point of view of the SNP. We'll get a big increase in seats, and we'll get a mandate for a new independence referendum. Now, the question then is whether Boris, if he wins the election, will grant that referendum, to which the answer, I think, is no, or whether there's going to be some other combination of parties through which it might be achieved.
And does that mean the SNP are staking everything on another hung parliament and being able to exert influence to secure the Section 30 order that Nicola Sturgeon wishes in order to sanctify another Scottish referendum?
Well, I think in practical terms, that's the only way it can come. You would have to have a minority Labour government dependent on the SNP, not necessarily in coalition, but dependent for certain matters on the SNP members of the House of Commons. And then the condition of that support would be that Jeremy Corbyn would permit another independence referendum. Now, he's already said that he's not willing to do that, but let's just wait and see what the outcome of the election is. I mean, it may be that Jeremy Corbyn, if he wants to be Prime Minister, I'm not entirely sure, if he wants to be Prime Minister, will really have no choice.
And a final question, Michael Fry. You're an unusual beast in Scottish politics in that you're a free market supporter of Scottish independence. What changes would you like to see in how the independence argument is deployed?
Well, I don't think ahead of a referendum, ahead of the actual achievement of independence, there's much chance of changing the policies of the SNP. I mean, I'm not sure they're set in stone, but they certainly have very heavy majorities in the conferences. But, the real world awaits out there. And the real world is composed of free markets, I'm afraid. And if Scotland wishes to participate in the international economy, then free markets is the only way to go.
Michael Fry from Edinburgh, thank you very much indeed.
Join us after the break, where our panel of political pundits will answer the questions on where the parties stand as hostilities start. Welcome back. As the runners line up for the Christmas election race, the best people to mark your card are our panel of pundits. Peter Ober knows more about the inner workings of the Tory party than any other commentator, while Lembit Opik is a former presidential candidate of the Liberal Democrats. They are both in conversation with Alex.
So what about the circumstances of this general election being called? A bit of a pantomime, isn't it? I mean, on Monday, the House of Commons solemnly throws it back in the Prime Minister's face, and then Tuesday everybody agrees we're going to have the election after all. How about the circumstances of this election being called?
Well, I sort of think it was needed. I mean, whether or not, whatever the circumstances, I think we needed to have this out. Everything had got blocked, and now we're going to have most momentous general election of modern British history, probably of the last 100 years. It's going to be an election which will be more brutally fought by both sides and more unpredictable because you've got four parties all got great chances.
A big gain for the Prime Minister, surely, in getting the election. I mean, it should have been a huge humiliation. Today, the 31st, should have been his day of atonement, when we're not out of the European Union after all, and he's not dead in the ditch.
It's true that, and Jo Swinson's tactics, the leader of the Lib Dems, baffled me because I think that she's after a referendum and she's given Mr Johnson an election. Nevertheless, there are all kinds of problems for the British Prime Minister. There's the Brexit Party, which is going to fight it, I think. That's the signals we're getting, because of his deal. And so he's going to lose, how much? 10% of the voters, which would naturally vote Conservative? I don't know. That's one of the many questions. Likewise, that there are massive issues about his integrity. He's a man who keeps on making broken promises and telling lies. It's a big problem for a British Prime Minister into that election. He's not trusted. I'm not so sure. of the result.
And how about your old lot, the Liberal Democrats? Surely they've stolen a march with the SNP, stolen a march on the Labour Party by forcing this election.
To an extent, in an expedient way, they have. Jo Swinson wanted an election. They've made a calculation. They think they can gain seats in Remain sympathetic areas. She's probably right. But there's a bigger mistake here, and we've just been discussing that. She's more or less squandered the opportunity for a referendum in preference to a general election. The general election will be the referendum, and if Boris Johnson does well, and if the Lib Dems don't make much impact there, let's assume Labour's kind of abstaining on Brexit at the moment, then that's the end of Remain. That's the end of any prospect of rerunning this debate. Now, in chess, you play not one move ahead, but about 5 moves ahead. It seems to me Boris Johnson has done that, because by the beginning of this week, he couldn't lose. Either he got his deal through, he got his election decision through, or the public would be on his side because he was prevented. As it turns out, he's got exactly what he wanted, a Brexit-based election where his only real problem is the Brexit party.
So why didn't the opposition parties roast his deal on a spit, as they could have done through its committee stages and with amendments in the House of Commons pointing out its limitations, its inconsistencies?
They tried to, but back to the chess analogy, Alex, he's had them in check for move after move after move. Actually, Boris has had everybody else on the back foot. So I think he's caused Jo Swinson to make a tactical mistake for the reasons I've just explained, and he's absolutely cornered the Labour Party, who don't want an election for love nor money, because they feel that they're too riven and they're too abstaining on this, because in the north their supporters are very pro-Brexit, in the south they're pro-Remain. The real losers here are probably going to be the Labour Party, and the gainers, my guess, will be the Tories.
So the SNP and Liberals both thought they could make gains, so they're there for the logic in the election, but might end up with a Boris Johnson with a comfortable majority and 5 years of purgatory. Do you think it's as cut and dried as that for Johnson, or do you think this election will have, like Brexit, have many twists and turns?
I think Mr. Opic is an interesting analysis. He may be right, but let's consider the Conservatives are going to lose their seats in Scotland. They're going to lose quite a lot of seats in the south to the Lib Dems. It will possibly include the Uxbridge constituency occupied by the Prime Minister.
You're not seriously forecasting the Prime Minister himself is in danger
yeah,
in this election?
I think he is. I think they're going to lose seats in London. They're going to lose seats in the southwest. They're going to lose seats in Scotland. The question then, whether the mythical working class vote, the Brexit vote, up in the northeast and in the Midlands, they're going to come out, abandon Labour and go on to the Conservatives. Let's see. It's a massive gamble.
Since we're being formal about it, I beg to differ, Mr. Oborne, because as far as I see it, we overestimate party loyalty at the moment and underestimate the power of Brexit. Lots of former Lib Dem seats are really pro-Brexit, especially in inner London. There will be an uplift for the Lib Dems, I think particularly, as you say, in the southwest, but by and large, the great rich pickings here are in the north of England for the Conservatives, where the Labour Party really need to look pro-Brexit to keep that vote in. But the big fly in the ointment for Boris Johnson is Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party. If he doesn't do a deal there, and I totally agree with you on this, then he's got 10% as a hostage to fortune. I personally think he has to have a backdoors chat with Nigel Farage. Then he's all set.
But something else might rain on Boris's parade, and that is Jeremy Corbyn. In the last election, every single political commentator underestimated Corbyn's ability as a campaigner. He may not be the best or even mediocre parliamentary leader, but as a campaigner in the last election, he clearly outshone Theresa May.
Absolutely, and I think that I don't necessarily share your assumption they're going to abstain on Brexit. I don't know what the Labour Party position is.
It's can they do that?
I would guess they will back a referendum. That's what they seem to have been moving towards. In other words, they're going to soak up quite a lot of Remainer votes. I think they will risk their northern votes. I don't see how they can just sit on the fence throughout the general election.
But the problem with that, Peter, is if they go for referendum, that's actually being superseded by the real referendum, which is the general election. If you really are obsessed with Remain, you vote Lib Dem. If you're obsessed with Brexit, you vote Tory or maybe Brexit Party. The Labour Party is so visibly split with a leader who's jumped both ways himself. I just don't think they've got a strong message.
Are you convinced that this will be, I mean, it's certainly going to be a Christmas election. You know, we should all be watching, oh, It's a Wonderful Life. We'll be watching political debates. But are you convinced it's going to stay as a Brexit election?
Well, I think it will do because of the fact that Boris Johnson's got the dream ticket here. Nothing's really been formally agreed. If it had all been done and dusted to third reading, royal assent, then we could talk about the health service and everything else. But
so you're saying it suits Boris Johnson not to have his deal through the Commons because it will still be to be decided at the election?
It suits four parties. Boris Johnson as a Brexiteer, to some extent Nigel Farage, who can wag the Tory dog if he gets it right, the Lib Dems, who will make some modest gains as Remainers, the SNP, because they've got their agenda. The one party this doesn't suit is the Labour Party, and that's where the cannibalisation of votes will take place. And I think that they'll really hemorrhage to the Tory advantage and maybe to an extent the Lib Dem advantage.
Peter, you know the inner workings of the Tory party more than just about anyone. The departure of so many of the Tory wise heads, how is that? I mean, I saw earlier this week, Philip Hammond desperately trying to stop an election, appealing for everybody to grow up and be cooled down. Of course, that wasn't likely to happen. But nonetheless, what is that going to do to the balance of the Conservative Party? And are there some people who are very worried about that?
I think that unlike Labour, which is technically united, the Conservative Party, let's not forget, has actually split. It's very interesting to see how they're going to conduct themselves in this election, because that's sending a message to middle-of-the-road voters that the Conservative Party may have become a feral party whose election campaign is going to be run by, I'm assuming, we will find out, one of the questions, Dominic Cummings, this feral, known, the man who ran the vote lead, hates Conservatives. It's worth bearing in mind. He hates the Conservative Party. He wants to break up Britain.
You're not fond of Dominic Cummings.
Well, I'm just defining what he... and is this person going to run... In other words, the Conservative Party is, if it is run by Cummings, will run it as a revolutionary party, which wants basically to destroy the institutions of the British state, including the rule of law, hates Parliament, because he's in contempt. And that's quite interesting that party, which is not the Conservative Party I recognise. I've never had the honour of reporting in 30 years as a political correspondent, generally speaking Conservatives. We've got another lot, this lot, run by Cummings with his creature Johnson.
It is a remarkable revival for Boris Johnson. I mean, only a few weeks ago, the Supreme Court declares rules that he'd acted unlawfully, misled Her Majesty the Queen, and now he's heavy odds-on favourite to romp home in an election.
2 points here. Well-built ships do not founder in a storm. And I've never seen Boris Johnson look like he's wavering. He's got a game plan, and actually I'm pretty impressed with it. His narrative is consistent. That's really vital in an election. Secondly, you're right, there's an awful lot of feral activity going on, but feral creatures don't starve. They rip apart the weak. And at the moment, there is weakness, but not in the Conservative Party.
Now, we're going to reassemble at various points in this campaign, but at this stage, the starting gun is just being fired at the present moment. First, Lambert, who's sitting pretty and who's got it all to do?
I predict an overall majority for the Conservatives, and the size of that majority is dependent on one binary question. Does he do a deal with the Brexit Party and Nigel Farage or not? If he does do a deal, big majority. If he doesn't, he'll scrape through.
And what sort of shape could that deal take? I mean, what do you offer the Brexit Party? I can't offer them seats.
Leaving aside the temptation of giving one person a peerage, the other part of this is to use the Brexit Party as the attack dogs with the awkward squad, the people that Peter was mentioning before who have left the Conservative Party. Put the Brexit Party in there to smash their chances of winning, and then elsewhere get the Brexit Party either to not stand or to really go easy on the Conservatives.
Well, what about it, Peter? As we start the race, who's going to take the early lead and who do you think is going to be there at the finish?
I think that Boris Johnson will take the early lead. I think, though, it's a very rocky path he has to charter. And I predict a hung parliament. And I think that a hung parliament will therefore be followed by a referendum, because that will be the second way of solving it.
So the People's Vote campaign, who've not had too much to cheer over the last few days, the million people at the rally recently have been watching this, and you'll become the new pin-up boy of the People's Vote campaign.
If I'm right.
Peter Levitt, thank you as ever.
At last, the Brexit denouement. It will now be a Christmas election which decides Britain's European future. So if the Tories win, we'll be out, and if Labour win, we'll be in. But things are hardly that straightforward. In reality, if the Tories win, we still can't be sure that the current agreement won't break down at the next stage of negotiation of a trade deal at the end of next year. In other words, there could still be a delayed no-deal Brexit. No deal is better than a bad deal, as triumphant Tories might say. Unfortunately, for all those who want to be shot of Brexit once and for all, the withdrawal agreement is only stage one of a process almost without end. Meanwhile, if Labour were to prevail in this Yuletide poll, then they would negotiate another European deal and put it to a referendum. However, it is not then clear whether a new Labour government itself would then campaign for Brexit or for Remain. The obvious difficulties in explaining this policy may be why the main opposition party have not been exactly gagging to enter this winter election campaign. Then, of course, there is the electoral impact of the resurgent Liberal Democrats and the high-flying SNP. These pro-European parties could potentially win enough seats to pour rain on Boris Johnson's parade. Not to mention Nigel Farage waiting to pounce on any semblance of a Brexit betrayal. Boris Johnson may find out, like Theresa May before him, that an opinion poll lead is no guarantee of untrammelled election success. And as historian Michael Fry reminded Alex, the one consistent feature of winter polls over the last century is that they did not turn out as expected, at least by those who called them. The Tories still start as heavy favourites, and few commentators give Labour much of a chance, but then just about everybody wrote off Jeremy Corbyn last time round, and just about everybody was wrong. All these imponderables suggest that our political pundits may have to reconvene ere long to fully explain the next turn in the road to Brexit. They'll examine how the campaign is going. When it comes to this election, we see as through a glass, very darkly indeed. And all will become clear only when it is finally over. Next week, we show how important cross-party parliamentary work of fighting for key causes has continued, despite Brexit sucking in all the political bandwidth. The celebrated TV vet Mark Abraham tells us how the legislative breakthrough on animal rights, Lucy's Law, was organised while most political commentators were transfixed by the Brexit drama. But until then, from Alex, me and all at the show, it's goodbye for now, and we hope to see you next week.